Welcome back to the shed. Today I asked the question, are self-published authors worth your time and effort when it comes to reading their novels? Now, I've read quite a fair few self-published authors, and some have been absolutely great and some of them have been just absolutely atrocious. So I wanted to put it back to the test. Now, I've been a big fan of News from the Gelding, and I'll put a link to his YouTube channel down below, because John Chapman, every time one of his videos comes up, I always watch him, and within a couple of minutes, he's literally got me laughing out loud. So when I realized that he's got a new book out, a new novel, that sort of aims towards a fantasy, humor sort of niche, I thought I've got to give this a go. So I went ahead, bought the book, and I landed with this wonderful novel called Brown Robe Blues. So what I would like to do is provide a bit of a plot overview, talk to what I liked, what I didn't like, I'll make some recommendations, and then we're going to do something pretty new to the show, which is a Meet the Author segment. So I've had the opportunity to sit down with John via Zoom and ask a couple of questions and see where he drew some of his inspiration. So I hope you join me for that, because it was a real fun session that I thoroughly enjoyed. So Brown Robe Blues begins with this guy called Tarek Nimblefoot, and Tarek can only be described as an alcoholic, right? He just absolutely loves his beer and very little else. And the novel begins with him in his bedroom waking up with a stranger lying beside him. Now, this is not unusual for Tarek. At least he's not surprised to wake up with some stranger in his bed, because his heavy drinking has put him into all sorts of crazy situations in the past. But he's rather surprised when he takes a look to realize that this is a beautiful woman that's sitting next to him. But he doesn't have much time to contemplate, because he's running late for his trial of, what was it called? Trial of choosing. Because you see, Tarek is a wizard of the brown robe variety. It's a sort of apprentice of types. And he's going in for his induction, this ceremony called the trial of choosing, where they go ahead and decide what color robe they're going to wear and discard of their brown robes. So he's already running late, he's already completely hungover, and he's got to deal with one of the most difficult trials of his life. Now, the problem is compounded by the fact that this is his last opportunity to impress the other wizards and get a choosing of his cloak, right? Because he's something like 40 years old, he's in his mid-40s, he's failed every single attempt, and he's by far the oldest person trying to go for this trial. So the trial sort of begins well, and he does summoning of this wonderful creature, but there appears to be some type of sabotage and things don't quite work out the way he planned. He goes back to his bedroom and his life just takes a turn for the worst, because this mysterious stranger has left a note for him saying, hey, you're in danger, you need to leave town. But Tarek doesn't really pay much heed to it. He thinks, this is just rubbish, you know, I'm well liked in this town, and he sort of ignores it. But what we also find is that the Queen's gone missing, the Queen's Guard is starting to run rampant, and every single criminal element within what's it called? Mellow Dawn, the town, the name of the town. Every single criminal element in Mellow Dawn seems to be after Tarek and his skin. So he's on the run and he's not quite sure what's going on. He sort of starts to think that maybe he's been framed, maybe this mysterious stranger is not all that she seems to be, and she's causing all this trouble. And he pulls together his motley crew of friends who are just fantastic in trying to piece the puzzle together and understand exactly what's going on to redeem himself and get to the bottom of this mystery and find out exactly what's caused all this havoc and why are people after his skin. So what did I enjoy? Look, I thoroughly enjoyed this one. I thought it was a good escape from reality. And to be honest, I've had some sleepless nights over the last couple of weeks dealing with some personal issues, and I found myself at 2 o'clock in the morning picking up John's book, having a read through it, and going back to bed with a smile on my face. So it did exactly what it needed to do, which is that bit of fun, light-hearted humor, put that smile on your face and make you forget about life in general, right? And I've thoroughly enjoyed that. Like I said, I've said it in the past, I read just before bed, and several times, honestly, several times reading through this novel, I chuckled out loud, and my wife turned to me and said, "Are you reading John's book?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And it really is a fun book, right? And so it really was fun. And I sort of came in with an expectation of John's humor, right? If anyone's familiar with his channel, and I highly recommend you follow the link down below and take a look at the novel, and at least his channel, because I came in expecting that, right? Expecting John's humor, but I didn't know what to expect of his writing, and I'm pleased to report that I'm thoroughly impressed with John's writing as well. Look, his writing is on cue. I thought it had everything that it needed to have for this genre of novel, and I thoroughly enjoyed the writing as well. The story and the plot I found really enjoyable. There are a couple of plots and twists and turns that have you guessing right to the end, which I really enjoyed as well. The other thing I really enjoyed are John's characters. I think John has a really good knack of building very fun and likable characters. As I was reading through the book, I honestly was reading through it and I think, oh geez, I hope nothing happens to this guy. Right? Oh geez, I hope nothing happens to this guy. Because the novel itself, those characters, I fell in love with every single one of them. I thought they were a very likable bunch and someone that I'd like to go and spend an evening with having a couple of beers and shooting a couple down, right? I found them to be all very enjoyable characters. But I especially like the barbarians who run this poet society of sorts. I just found them to be absolutely awesome. So much fun that it was just a highlight for me in a novel. So what didn't I like? Look, it's difficult to make criticisms of books that you thoroughly enjoyed. Now, I came in knowing what I was going to get, which was that light-hearted, fun humor, nothing to take too seriously. But what I would say is that wasn't really reflected in the cover. Now, I do really enjoy the cover. I actually do enjoy the cover, and I know John, and seeing his face on the novel, it inspired me to go out and purchase the novel itself, right? Because he's sort of modeled Tarek. That's Tarek, the main character in the novel, but that's also John Chapman. So he sort of drew inspiration from his own life, I'm assuming. We'll find out during the interview. So I enjoyed the cover art for what it is, knowing John. But I'm not quite sure what kind of shelf appeal the cover itself had. It didn't really talk to what I thought was in the novel, which is that Terry Pratchett, Robert Asprin type vibe, right? I mean, you do get glimpses of it in the background, but I'm not sure if the photo montage does the book any real justice when it comes to street appeal. But that could be a personal thing. I'm not quite sure, because I do enjoy the cover art. I thought John put some really good time and effort into the photo montage. And I found myself several times actually looking back at the cover, trying to see the resemblances of the characters in the novel. So it sort of worked, but I'm not quite sure if it'll work for just your random sci-fi or fantasy enthusiast who's walking by or going onto Amazon and perusing and thinking, oh, that looks like a real fun, light-hearted read. So I don't know, maybe that's the only sort of thing I sort of could look at with some positive criticism, because overall I thoroughly enjoyed the novel, penis with penis jokes included, right? So you do get that, right? That pure sort of light-hearted, childish sort of sense of humor, but there's some very interesting adult themes in there as well. So when it comes to recommendations, look, for me, if you're looking for a light escape, right, you just want to read something light that flows from chapter to chapter, you don't have to put your thinking hat on, that has no loose endings, which is another thing I really enjoyed in the novel, then I think I can't but highly recommend John's Brown Robe Blues, right? It is exactly that. And it had me, like I said, smiling at 2 o'clock in the morning when I couldn't sleep, thinking, this is just awesome, right? This is just fun, exactly what I needed. So I highly recommend it for that. Now, if you're a Terry Pratchett sort of fan, I'm not going to say it's similar kind of humor, but similar kind of world setting, right? Mellow Dawn, where the novel is set, did remind me a lot of Ankh-Morpork, for those of you who are familiar with the Discworld novels. So I saw the similarities there, and I really did enjoy the city of Mellow Dawn and the whole region, right? He's got a map at the back of the book where Tarek sort of takes him through several journeys in the book. So you get a really good world setting, right? I really like the world building. So definitely the recommendations are there. If you're a Terry Pratchett fan, I think you will enjoy this. It's a little bit more, adult humor. There are curse words in here that come up quite often, but I didn't find them repulsive in any way. I actually enjoyed it. Like I said in the past, I'm not guilty of dropping the F-bomb here and there myself. And you will get definitely your fair share of that and penis jokes in the novel. So come in. You're getting that sort of Terry Pratchett, Robert Aspirin type vibes for those of you who are familiar with Robert Aspirin. I've done a review of a Robert Aspirin book in the past if you want to get a feel for what he's like. You may find a link below as well. But yeah, I sort of got that blend, right? That Robert Aspirin, Terry Pratchett with a bit of more adult language to boot. So if you're that kind of, if that sounds interesting to you, then I reckon you're going to really like John's new book here. When it comes to ratings, look, I have really enjoyed it. It was exactly what I was looking for. It exceeded my expectations, and I've ranked it a 5 in Google Reads, right? Because I think it is worth, not Google Reads, Goodreads, I should say. So I've rated a 5 in Goodreads because I think it deserves it. I think John deserves to get some, recognition for the hard work, the obvious hard work that is put into the novel. That does bring a smile to your face. So got a 5 from me. Thank you, John, for the opportunity. I did purchase the book, so this is not a sponsored video. I did purchase the book with my own money, and this is a fair and unbiased opinion of a fan. So call me a fanboy if you like. But I thought I really enjoyed it. So thank you for spending time with me in the shed. We're going to flip over to the Zoom call now, so I hope you stick around for that because it was really fun spending some time with John, getting a bit more an understanding of where he drew his inspiration. And I hope you enjoyed me for that because I had a lot of fun bringing it to you.
Yeah, sweet.
So John,
Lovely.
Thanks for joining me in the virtual sci-fi shed today. It's really good to meet you face to face, at least. I've been a fan and we've had the opportunity to talk on YouTube several times. So it's nice to really touch base. And yeah, so look, Brown Robe Blues, I just finished reading it and I've shot a review. And I thought, great opportunity to ask you a couple of questions and we'll take it from there. It's really going to be ad hoc. I don't have that many notes as far as questions to ask, but we just play it by ear and see where it takes us, yeah?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, go for it.
So, Brown Robe Blues, I noticed in several of your videos you were wearing a brown robe, and I was wondering what that was all about, And I'm assuming you were putting yourself in character for this novel. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. I think well, it was about 2 years ago, maybe, on my channel. I bought this robe just to wear occasionally
Right.
for like live streams, things like that. Because I do
Yeah.
sometimes I'm just drinking and chatting, so I got it for that. So I was pretending to be a wizard. And
Right.
then I thought when I started working on this book, I thought, oh yeah, I'm wearing this thing. I'm pretending to be a wizard, but everyone always thinks I'm a monk or
Correct.
a Jedi or something. Because occasionally I go outside and wear it and get people saying, "Oh, he's a Jedi" and all that crap. So that was in my mind. I thought, oh, you could still be a wizard and have a brown robe, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
So
right.
that was what started that off, really.
So the sort of the
In a way.
inspiration. So the robe became the inspiration for the story.
That's right. Yeah.
I noticed on the sleeve of the book itself, you sort of said that you modeled Tarek. Is it Tarek or Tarek?
Yeah, Tarek.
Tarek.
Yeah, Tarek.
You said that you modeled Tarek after yourself in some degree. And as
Yes.
I was reading through the novel, I was wondering just how close is Tarek to the real John Chapman?
um, well, pretty close actually. In terms of like, so my close family and friends experience that side of me, if you will.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I'm not an alcoholic or anything, but I do like a drink, and I used to be a smoker, and I use a lot of bad language on a regular basis. It's just I quite enjoy using swear words occasionally. So, and just his attitudes, I suppose, slightly irreverent. And I suppose you get to a certain age. I'm 44 now, and I just think there's a lot of things I won't tolerate, or I have quite set views about things, and so I'm not afraid to say it in front of people I know, if you know what I mean. But whereas Tarek, he kind of, that character, he's like that all the time.
Sure. Yeah.
He doesn't give a damn. I really like that, because I'm not like that outside of, I suppose most people aren't, there's social conventions, obviously. I wouldn't go outside, and F this, F that in front of people, and, being drunk and things like that. So yeah, it's kind of a wish fulfillment, I suppose. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Growing into the character.
Well, you wait until you get into your 50s. I think that sort of patience gets lower and lower as you get older.
Mm.
So
Hmm.
Tariq, I was curious when I read the name as well. The reference to Tariq, I haven't heard the name before. Is that a completely made up name, or where did you draw inspiration for the name itself? Because I know we talked offline about what was it, Walter the White, and well, maybe we'll come back to
Yes.
that. But I wondered if there was a similar sort of story with Tariq.
Unfortunately, yeah. So I didn't make the name up. So when I wrote the first couple of pages of the book, I thought, right, I need a name for this character who's like who I want to be, if you will. And I just basically just looked up medieval English names,
Right.
and that was a relatively common name at the time. So yeah, I just did that, and then his surname being Nimblefoot, it was just a play on the fact that he's actually overweight, and
Yeah.
he's not nimble at all. So it's just that kind of contrast, really, but nothing more than that. All the other names, we talk about Walter later, perhaps, I just made up on the spot. So
Right.
whenever I'm writing, the way I write it anyway is just make things up as I go along completely. So a name will just pop into my head and I'll put it down. I very, very rarely change it. So it doesn't, yeah, I don't know where it comes from, really. Yeah.
It's very cool. With Tarek, I've talked in the past, we both share a passion for the arts and painting. And I do a
Mm.
lot of comic drawings, and I've got several characters that I've created over the years. And I find that those characters take a life of their own. Like if I try to draw them a different way, it's almost like that character comes to life and says, "No, I would never be seen in that setting. Don't put me in that setting." Did you find
Mm-hmm.
similar experiences when you wrote your novel and the characters that you created in this world? Did you find that took a life on their own?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, yeah. It was quite. I've come across this before writing other things, but with this one, yeah, an idea for a character would come just out of the ether, or the situation would demand a particular type of character, and they would be introduced, and then they existed of their own free will. And so, when it came to characters talking to each other, they it just happened. The way they talked, what they talked about, even would just happen without me planning anything at all, and so it would just work. But yeah, like you say, occasionally I would dream up, a scenario and try to make it work around those characters, especially Tarek, and it just wouldn't. You very quickly get a feel as to whether he would be, how he would react
Yeah.
in a certain situation. The same with some of the other characters. So yeah, it just kind of happens. Yeah, and yeah, definitely very similar to your experiences of drawing or envisaging a visual representation of a character. They do have a life of their own, for sure. Outside of, it's ticking away somewhere in your head, and they exist there, I suppose. And so they're using a little bit of your brain to become alive, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that. Um, you mentioned several characters, and we might come back to some of those. But one of the highlights, honestly, John, that I took away from reading the book is your character development. I just found them just lovable characters, right? Before their faults, right? I just found that
Yeah.
I got to know these guys. And like I said in my review, I'd like to have an evening with these guys, just shooting a couple down and get to know them a little bit better. So just curious about that. Like, have you had some formal training when it comes to writing? I know this is not your first book. Um,
Mm.
so I'm just interested in your journey. When did you first start writing? And I think you've got a talent, and I would just want to explore that a little bit more.
Oh, that's very nice of you to say. So I suppose the very first thing I wrote was a piece of travel writing. So when I was a young man, I I went. I lived in Japan for a year. That was one thing I did, and then I went back and did a cycle ride across the country, and I wrote a book about that. So that was the very first thing I wrote. But so I cut my teeth on that, and it took me years and years to write that. And it was tricky because it was a rigid text. I'd already written the diary whilst I was riding my journey, and so writing it then was, I had to go by that blueprint, so to speak. But it got me into the way of writing, I suppose. Then after that, I started writing what was going to be a trilogy of high fantasy, quite serious fantasy, kind of portal fantasy, going from this reality into another. And I really immersed myself into that, and that's where I think my whatever ability I might have was born through that. And so the first book took me 4 years, and I was single for a long part of that. I just come out of a long-term relationship. It went sour, and I had lots of time, shall we say, to indulge my fantasy and to use it as a form of escapism at the same time. But it was just like every single day I would get up, say like 5 o'clock in the morning, and start writing before work, an hour or two before work, and then I would sometimes take my computer with me. I was a taxi driver, and I would be writing, in between jobs and things like that. And so I just poured everything into it. And then the second book came, I did the same. But each time I suppose I was honing what I was doing, so it was becoming easier to write. And then I did some short stories, science fiction ones. But I think for me, fantasy is the ultimate form of escapism for me. I just love medieval settings, for example. And so it was last year, I just thought, oh, fuck it, I'll just write. I just want to escape today. Yeah. And I just started writing it, and I absolutely loved just going in there. But from those years of writing those other things, I found it easy. It was just coming out, whereas before, like the first book, that James of Galandar book I wrote back years ago, I had to work so hard. I wouldn't have been able to do that. I had to consider each part and really hone. I'd spend an hour on a paragraph, for example.
Right.
It was crazy. But this time it's just banged it down. And yeah, those things I learned definitely informed the writing of this one for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. So how long did it take you to write? What's it called again? I'm terrible memory, eh? Brown Robe Blues. How long did it take to
Mm.
write? I guess you
So
didn't do it full time, obviously. You did this still part time, working on the novel.
yeah. So this time, at the same time as I decided to write this, I thought I'll set myself a challenge. So I want to see how quickly I could write it. So the first draft of Brown Robe Blues was I did it in a month. So I was
Wow.
doing 2,000 to 3,000 words a day in between working. But as I said, I was just banging it out.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, obviously the first draft was a bit shoddy, but the bare bones were there. So yeah, it was pretty quick. And then I did about 4 or 5 revisions of that. So all in all, beginning to end, probably 7 months, I think it was in the end.
Yeah, that's pretty
Pretty good.
impressive. I don't know. I've tried writing stories in the past, but I've just soon discovered that I'm better at reading them than I'm trying to write them. So there goes my aspiration. Look, I'm interested in your previous works. I wouldn't mind having a look at them on one day. But going back to the Brown Road Blues, the King Still, also a very interesting establishment. I love the fact that what was it? It was the bottom floor of a 4-story apartment, which
Mm.
included 2 floors for the brothel. Which was what was it? Aunt Susie, Aunt Mary? What was it? It was
Oh,
one of
Aunt
the
Sally.
Aunt Sally, which I thought she was a pretty interesting character in the novel.
Mm.
Uh, but yeah, so I think for me, one of the highlights was definitely the characters, right? I just found them very enjoyable. Um, in particularly the barbarians. Now,
Mm.
I had to ask, do you have friends like who was it? Alfriston, right? Alfriston? Do you have, because that
Yeah.
guy I thought was just brilliant, as were all the barbarians. Because I think you said you
Yeah.
molded him after your brother to some degree. I just wanted to understand that a little bit more.
Yeah, visually, I mean, for the cover, I definitely enlisted my brother Kirk for that. He has a very nice physique anyway, but I did slap his head on Arnie's body from
Right.
Conan the Barbarian. But yeah, I suppose a friend of mine I met in when I was at art college years ago now, Dan, dear friend of mine. We've been friends ever since. He was a bodybuilder, a really serious bodybuilder, and yeah, I haven't taken everything from him, but he certainly gave me the lion's share of, he's actually quite a nice, sweet-hearted man, really, despite the fact that he's, built like a brick shit house and just loves, killing people. But it's
Exactly.
killing as a hobby, a pleasant hobby, I suppose.
Yeah, which is what I took away, right? He was pleased. I loved, and I won't give spoilers away, but there were certain scenarios in the novel where any sane human would just be terrified and run away. But you get this, what was it? I refer to them in my own head as the Dead Poets Society, because they were running some kind of poet club of some sorts, right? The barbarians. And I just thought, brilliant. Like, this is just so cool. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. As I did
Thanks.
the
Yeah.
whole Melodorn, right?
Hmm.
Now, as I was reading it, I'm not sure. Um, I'm assuming you're familiar with Terry Pratchett's work, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Because I couldn't help but see similarities in Melodorn to Ankh-Morpork in Terry Pratchett's
Mhm.
Discworld novels. Was that intentional, or is that just something that you sort of get the feel? You said you like your medieval settings, and is that
Hmm.
just inspiration from history, or is that from Terry, or a bit of both?
Lots of different things, really. I wasn't thinking specifically of Anchor Morpork, but so there's another series of fantasy, very similar to what I've done by Martin Scott. I don't know if you've heard of that, the Fraxus series. That's
I
all
have, but I haven't read
self-contained.
it. Yeah.
Okay, right. So that's self-contained within a great big city. But at the same time, it's like where I live here in Exeter. It's a medieval city basically. So this was also a walled city. So it's just going on the fact that most people, yeah, back in the day, to be safe, they would have lived within these great big fortified cities. So yeah, Mellow Dawn is an exaggeration of that for sure, because it is absolutely huge. And somewhere in the past, yeah, it's been self-contained within an outer wall, and then there's an inner wall. It's always about protection, but somewhere along the line, it's either just been abandoned, or that they're just letting them. There's a period of peace, perhaps, and they're existing within this kind of fragile. They've got walls, but not much of a defense. So yeah, it was based on history and yeah, some of these other things I've read in the past. But Pratchett for sure must have been somewhere. I haven't read Pratchett for over 20 years, but yeah, I absolutely loved those books.
Yeah, and that sort of happens, right? We are a result of everything that makes us, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, and I sort of saw the similarities, but definitely not. There wasn't a copy and paste, which is what I really
Hmm.
enjoyed. You could see it was its own unique work, and I sort of hinted at
Oh,
in
good.
my review is, you know, I could see the similarities, but it's its own body of works. And it's completely different language, as you mentioned, to what
Yes.
Terry Pratchett would have. But I didn't think it was curse. I thought it was fine. Like I said in my review, I'm more than guilty of dropping the F-bomb here and there as well, right?
Hmm.
So I sort of forewarned people, this is what you get. It's this kind of humor.
Hmm.
But I
Sure.
thoroughly enjoyed it. And when you see the full video, I think you'll appreciate why in some of my likes and dislikes sections, which I didn't really
Yeah.
have too many dislikes. Let's just get that out of the way real
Oh,
quickly.
don't worry. I honestly, I really don't mind.
Oh no,
I mean,
it was all good. And you'll see the video. So John, yeah, I did thoroughly enjoy the book. We did mention offline because one of the first characters that we sort of get introduced to is Walter the White. And
hmm.
I sort of saw that and I thought, being a big Breaking Bad fan, I sort of looked at
Yeah,
that
yeah.
and I said to myself, I've got to ask John, do you mind sharing what you shared with me when it comes to Walter the White?
Yeah, that was, I suppose, as Bob Ross would have said, a happy accident. So I had Walter, the name Walter. I've read Stephen King's The Dark Tower, series, relatively recently, and the evil. bastard of a wizard was called Walter, I believe. And so it's just, like I said, the way I write, I just think, oh, I need a bad guy. I'll just bang Walter in just because it was in my head. And then at the same time, I came up with that idea of, it's kind of like the belt system in karate or whatever. So each level has a different color. So I thought, well, the pinnacle will be wizards wearing white robes. So it was a pure coincidence, really. And conversely, Tarek's being the color of excrement is the
All right.
direct opposite of white.
I love that. I didn't put the two and two together. That is just brilliant. I love that. That's really, really cool.
Cheers, yeah. And there might be other colors. I only explored, I think, white, purple, green, and yellow. But I've no idea what the hierarchy is. It's, just made it up, really.
That was very cool. Which sort of also, when I was reading it, there was that reference to Godric. And again, I thought I looked at that and I thought that's interesting. And you know what would be really cool to explore is that whole religious aspects of Melodorn, because you sort of hinted at little areas, and Tarek being almost disgruntled, I almost read, with the whole religious establishment of the area. And I thought that would be a pretty coal revisit to Discworld, I was going to say, to Melodorn. Which sort of begs the question. Really did enjoy the novel, and it was the kind of novel that I thought I want to revisit. So the question is there a sequel in the pipes? Do you reckon you'll come out with a sequel for this novel somewhere down the track?
Yeah, certainly. I've already started writing it. I've done 10,000 words of it. Again, just banging it out, really. But yeah, it's coming quite well. And as you said, it's quite a juicy. There's a lot that I could explore within the city. Even I've done that map, and there's all these different areas that I've got tenuous ideas of what goes on there. So there's lots that it's in the mix, if you will. And the religious side, I suppose it kind of does feed back to my own ways of thinking, that I'm agnostic, I suppose you could say. I don't have a religion. Tarek's opinion slightly more is stronger, but at the same time they have a kind of, multi-theism. I don't know what you'd call it now, just lots of gods, polytheism. And
Polytheism,
so he despises Godric's following just because they hate people that drink, obviously. But I did actually come up with the opposite version, the opposite religion, where they're just always pissed, and the bell ringers end up hanging themselves all the time on the ropes because they're all completely drunk. So there's lots of other things to explore. So I'm kind of getting into it again now, just as another form of escapism, really. I'm not expecting it to do much. I'm just doing it, really.
Well, look, we're almost out of time. We got a Zoom restriction on us, John. I just wanted to say, look, thank you for the opportunity for the chat. I appreciate you getting up early. If you're anything like Tarek, with a strange woman by your bed, which I thought was brilliant. Look, I do appreciate you getting up for the telephone, for the Zoom call, and spending a bit of time with us, getting a bit to meet the author, get a bit of an understanding what drives the narrative of the story here, which I thought was a very pleasant one. And I'm really honestly looking forward to revisiting the Brown Robe Blues world of Melodorn. So I'm looking forward to that, and I wish you all the best with it.
Lovely. Cheers, Peter. Yeah, really, really kind of you to do this. Thank you.
No problem.
So that was it. I hope you enjoyed that interview, and I hope you enjoyed this segment. And if you'd like to see more, if you're an aspiring author and you've just released a book self-published and you'd want to be partaking in something like this, I'd love to hear from you, because I'd love to do the same for you as well. So thank you for joining me in the shed with our Meet the Author segment, and I'll see you next time in the shed.